Hola, pod peeps across the digital domain. It's the Deacons Pod, where spirituality and justice meet real American life in the 21st century. I'm Deacon Dennis. Say hello to my co-conspirators, Paulist affiliate deacons, Deacon Tom and Deacon Drew.
Well, hello there for our listeners. This is the Deacons Pod with Deacon Dennis and Deacon Drew. We're here to talk about prison ministry this afternoon, and we hope that you enjoy our conversation.
Hey, how are you doing?
Good. How's it going, Drew? Tom?
Yeah, very well.
Yeah.
Very well. Thank
You
you very
looking
much.
good?
Yeah. But as much as I try, this is as good as it gets.
Well, I'm glad you answered him, Tom, because I know he wasn't talking to me when he said looking good.
No, I was talking to you too.
So the reason why we want to talk about prison ministry is because I heard from one of our listeners after she listened to our Vocation Story podcast that she was very interested in prison ministry. And to be honest with you, I'm very interested in prison ministry too, for a number of reasons. That's a ministry that's foreclosed to me because I can't go into the prisons anymore because of my profession, which I've retired from. We'll just say it like that. So we will talk about that today. Before we do, though, just to put it in a spiritual context, I'd like to read from the Gospel of St. Matthew. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, "Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who were members of my family, you did it to me." The Gospel of St. Matthew. Well, Dennis, Tom, each of you, I think, have a pretty long and intense experience of prison ministry. So let me ask you, how did it start?
How did it start? In the beginning.
Very biblical. Thank you.
Go ahead, Tom. The statute of
So,
limitations is up on all this stuff. So, let your freak
okay.
flag fly. You know what I mean? Let it go.
Yeah, really. Well, I had a very personal invitation into prison ministry, and it was by our co-host, Deacon Dennis.
I know a sucker when I see one.
There you go. Yeah. That working in the world but not being of the world theme. But Dennis one day just come out and said, here I was, a CEO of a credit union for a major pharmaceutical firm. And he comes up with this outrageous invitation that, hey, we're going to need a prison chaplain. And why don't you give it some thought? And when I got done laughing a couple of weeks later, like, how crazy is this? Again, how you end up where you end up is the work of the Holy Spirit. I firmly believe this. But it weighed on my mind, and I think really, just to appease Dennis, I said, well, yeah, let me find out more about it. And I really think, honestly, it was an appeasement. And so he introduced me to the head of the chaplains, Father Bruno, and we started talking, and one thing led to another. And I said, well, all right, let me give it some more thought. And he had said you had to go through the academy to be trained. And that was a function of the state of Connecticut. There was a budget problem, and they ended up putting off the academy training for a while. So I said, well, okay, that's good. Because
this is the academy that anybody who works for the Department of Corrections has to go to, whether you're a corrections officer, whether you're a maintenance officer, whether you're a counselor. This is basic training. So you know what you can bring in, what you can't, what you can do, what you can't do. how to do it safely, what happens if this, and so that you also understand everybody else's job. So you're not sitting there going, why doesn't this guy open the Sally Port door? You realize the guy in control is doing 15 other things, and you may have to wait a minute for him to push the button for you. So all those things, and the paramilitary
All those
structure and the
procedural,
whole
yeah.
thing. So that's
Yeah.
just for our listeners, that's what the academy is.
Well, let me
Plus some
let me take
physical.
it back one more step, if I may, Tom. You said you talked to
Sure.
the head of the chaplaincy program. You're talking about for one prison, for the entire prison system.
For the entire state of
Okay,
Connecticut.
so this was a state
what?
prison system for Connecticut.
Right.
Okay. What do we have? 21 prisons, I think, at the time. So as I said, the training academy was going to be put off for a while because of budgetary cuts. And so I went back to my financial work, and one thing led to another. And 6 months later, Father Tony comes up and says, well, they're going to do the academy. I said, well, okay, I don't think I'm still ready yet. We didn't have much time. So don't you know that the academy's put off again because they can't find the money to do this? Meanwhile, these places are being understaffed with chaplains and whatever, all the different officers.
And that's dangerous, just so we're clear. That's when people get hurt.
Yeah,
you don't
really.
have enough
It's
people to
not a
cover
good
the bases
situation.
in a prison. Just think about that. You're politicians at work. Go ahead.
Or not. And so finally, sufficient time goes by. I had been able to really ponder making that kind of change. I was still actually fearful to make the jump when the invitation came, but I knew it was decision time. And that had been about 2.5 years. I had the chance to put my own financial plan in order. Having been a financial planner, I knew how important that was. And one thing led to another, and I ended up saying yes. And boy, I still remember the day. I actually, because things were so bad, I actually went into the academy. I went into prison before I went to the academy, which was pretty much unheard of. So I remember walking into the compound on January 5th, 2005. And it was a cold day, and everything's gray and dismal. And I just remember shaking my head saying, I don't think this is a good idea. What am I doing here? And again, it was cold and dark, 5:30 in the morning, I think, because I went for early.
This was your first time in the prison or the first time in the academy?
First time in the prison, because I went to prison before the academy because we needed.
So you're visiting the prison. And which was this close to your home?
40 minutes away.
Okay. And is this the same prison that Dennis was a minister in?
Dennis went to multiple prisons. He ended up being rotated through as the chaplain. What, 4? 5. Yeah, I kind of bounced around for a couple. 5. He has 5.
I'm sorry for asking these, but I think the listeners will like to know kind of the mechanics of how this worked. Did you have a title? Were you a chaplain?
Chaplain.
Okay,
or deacon. Most people call me deacon. Deek, actually.
But the title, you were the official title was Catholic chaplain.
Catholic chaplain.
Catholic chaplain.
And was this a paid position or an unpaid?
This was,
a paid position. Okay.
Paid us in corner of the realm.
And a 20-year retirement, too, as it turns out. Who knew?
Yeah.
Well, I take it. And it
hazardous duty.
I would say.
No, that's what it's called. That's why you get 20 and out. You can stay longer than 20, but you can retire after 20 years, just like a state trooper or a cop or whatever.
And how often did you go to the prison to perform your chaplaincy duties?
I was days a week. I went Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. 5. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
And what about you, Dennis?
Yeah,
5 days a week? Same days? Tuesday through Saturday?
Well, whatever day you could set up your own schedule as long as the bases were touched. And the way it worked is that you shared the chapel space. So Sundays was claimed by the Protestants before we came on board. And so we did Mass on Saturday or communion service, as the case may be. We could get a priest in. And then you worked around that. So you might take Sunday and Monday off as your 2 days off and work Tuesday through Saturday or whatever. Okay. And Tom worked at the men's prison, which is next door to the women's prison. I started off half-time at the men's, half-time at the next door women's. It was like 2 part-time positions they put together. And then once a full-time one opened up, that was at the women's prison. So I took that as the responsible thing to do for my family. And Tom came into the men's prison, Gates Prison, which was full-time when you came in, right? They had changed the hours, so that was now a full-time position. So we were, and then Tom also later on the men were using part of the women's prison grounds in the minimum security section outside the fence. They had no contact with women, but it was technically on the women. It was only one women's prison. The other 20 are men, different kinds of men and stuff. And so Tom and I would be in the same place at the same time, and we would have lunch between masses and stuff, because we had to do maximum security was one mass, minimum security was on the other side of the fence. And so in between, Tom and I and the volunteers would have lunch, and we'd have a little bit of fun and everything, so we'd see each other then.
Well, you just answered a question that I had. And so this prison had maximum and minimum security?
The prisons, okay, so the prisons go from levels 1 to 5, 5 being max, 1 being you're about ready to be let out. And like I said, there's 21 of them, and so a prison might be level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, in the men's 20 prisons, your prison would be one level. So when I was at Gates, was a level 3, was medium security.
Okay.
And so obviously the closer you get to release, the more things you're allowed to do, blah, 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 the restrictions lower. And of course, you may start at level 3, depending on your crime, or you might start at level 2 if you, some kind of white collar crime that there's no violence or danger to society or whatever. Now, in the women's prison, you had all 5 levels in one institution. That was entertaining.
I bet it was.
Yeah,
I bet it
because
was.
there's only one women's prison. So we had minimum security through max. We had a hospital. We had mental health. We had a place for the young youthful offenders, female youthful offenders. We had everything. Now, with the men, this whole prison would be the mental health prison. Like if you had there are a lot of mental health problems, but if you really were acting out serious mental health, you went to one particular place where the staff was trained to deal with that. If you were a teenage boy, you went to Manson Youth or something. You went to a place where we deal with teenagers. Well, we had to keep these young girls away from the older women and, all this,
right. Mm-hmm.
From the courts. So we, the women's prison was interesting because you had the whole DOC in one place.
Okay. So now you're a chaplain. What's your day like? It's 5 days a week. Did you have a mass every day or group sessions? Tell us about your day when you walked in that early morning, gray, foggy January day.
You get in, and the first thing you do is make some coffee because it's cold outside. Get some coffee, and you wait for the count to clear, and then you do what I used to call the walkabout.
Tell them what the count is.
Probably about a mile.
Tell them what the count is.
Huh? I'm going to presume I know what the count is, but tell us what the count is.
Yeah, that's where I think when I first got there were about 1,100 men at the prison. And so every unit, the CO in every unit had to count their inmates at specific times, 4 or 5 times during the day. And they had to call the count into the main house. Nobody would move. Everybody's under bunk in their cell. There's no activities going on. And each CO counts those people. Now, you might have a couple people out at court and stuff like that. That couldn't be helped. So they would have to say, well, we've got 108 men here, 2 men at court. And then somebody would count all the added up and make sure that it agreed with the prison population. And that would go on 5 times a day, Dennis. How soon you forget. And every once in a while, the count would be off. And then that would just delay any program that you had. So if you had a program, Bible study starting at 1 o'clock and the count after lunch was not right, then it would go on until they finally came across the radio, okay, the count is cleared. You might have eaten up 40 minutes of the hour. And so at that point in time, there would be a resistance that you would basically have lost the program. So it was difficult. You really learn. I mean, it's easy to be critical, but it's really hard to keep track of people and to walk through the units, especially if the guys are trying to hide on you.
Well, anybody who's been an administrator in a school knows how hard it is to keep track of where everybody is. But having said that, then after the count was done, then what happened? What did you do next?
Well, I'd go around and do a program, or we had volunteers coming in, but basically the part that I really enjoyed, that to me was the real part of why the real compensation for me was walking around the units. I came in with some business experience. So when I found out the procedure of, like, I would get a document every day telling me the new inmates that were coming in. And when you come in as an inmate, you had declare your religious preference. So you could come in if you say Protestant or Catholic or Muslim, no religion. So I'd get a report every day that would tell me the names of the Catholics. So I had hooked up with this facility I was in, had a print shop that they trained a dozen men to work with printing. So I hooked up with the program instructor and got him to print me these little 5x7 cards. And what it was called itself the St. Dismas Community. And I put on there, I welcomed the men to join the community, and then I put the schedule of the activities on the back. So I would walk around each day. I was in the compound, and specifically looking for those new inmates, whatever unit they were in. I'd hunt them down. I'd introduce myself and give them a card with the program. And I think that was very successful. It was something that really wasn't done by the other chaplains. And it earned me a lot of credibility with the inmates. So we were able to get into a lot deeper conversations with them for those trying to work their way out. And for them, it just showed a lot of respect that I would do that. So I'd go around, and like I said, it was about a 2-mile activity by the time I get done at the end of the day, stopping here and there, and then you have lunch and count. So I'd have to go back to the office, and I'd print up some more of these forms or get some more information and do some reading prep for the either Bible study or I was going to do a Eucharistic service.
And a lot of times, Tom, you'd be talking to the staff too. I mean, we're technically there for the inmates,
right.
but you did a lot. I mean, the staff needed chaplain work too. So, which was also facilitated your getting to the inmates. You know, if you're in good terms with the staff, when you're like, I see this guy, I mean, they can either make your life difficult or they can make it easy. So.
And you're right. And a lot of the staff themselves had been through so much, there's a lot of negativity, obviously. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. So being a CO, sitting in a unit for 8 or 16 hours a day.
CO means corrections officer.
Corrections officer,
okay.
Yes.
So Dennis, let me turn to Dennis for a minute. So what was your day like, Dennis? Was it similar to Tom's or totally different? What did you do?
Essentially you have to realize that basically what you're doing is running a parish. That's the simplest way to do it. You know, we're pastoring the inmates. And so you would do whatever. People would want to see you. You do counseling, depending on, them asking for it. You'd prepare for services. A lot of times we preached because, no one wanted to come into prison. One of the great things about being in the prison is no one cared what you did. As long as they didn't get any letters, nothing bad happened.
When you say no one cared, you mean there was no hierarchy to watch everything you're doing?
Oh, yeah. No, there was no priest. And when a priest came in, he was working for me. He came in, he volunteered, very nice, God bless him. And a lot of these guys drove by 15 closer parishes. I mean, technically, we're in somebody's parish.
Right.
We never saw those people.
You never saw them?
Ever.
All right.
21 years. Never. But I would go over there.
Did you reach out for priests? Did you say, I need your father to come in on Sunday or Saturday?
Sure. Sure. And, and there would be priests that would drive, like I said, they drive the 40 minutes Tom and I drove through multiple parishes to get there. And, they do it for 10 years and burn out, and then you get someone else. And so it was very nice to get a priest on a semi-regular basis to come in, especially to hear confessions. When we had the bishop one time, I gave the bishop a heart attack. He said, well, what do you do about priests? And I said, I ain't got no priest, Bishop. You're the one with the priests. And he looked at me. I said, I'm not, if you got any? And he just looked at me because he knows. And I said, He says, well, what do you do about confessions? I said, I hear them all the time. And he almost had a stroke. I said, I don't give absolution, Bishop, but I'm the guy who's here. Who do you think they're talking to? Right. And he just said, oh, okay. But, so it's basically a parish. We had retreats. And of course, those were big deals to set up to keep people, because you had to take people off count.
Whoa, wait. I'm going to take a dive into this. You're in prison. Your parishioners are people who are not allowed to leave because they are in prison. Mm-hmm. So usually my concept of a retreat is when you leave the parish and go elsewhere. So talk to me about that. How did you do it?
Well, it would be in the institution. It would just be in a section, and we'd stay and we'd feed them there. And we built a community of people who wanted to be there without the negativity of the guys who didn't want to be, or the women who didn't want to be there. And they would have a retreat.
So you took them out of their daily horrible routine and put them in a better, nicer, more spiritual routine.
And we had all kinds of retreats. We had life in the spirit. We had various retreats, and we had volunteers who come in who did them, and they'd be for the weekend. And it would be a special thing and an in-depth time. And of course, the witness of the volunteers and all that stuff broke through to a lot of people. And so, but we would have confirmation classes. We would have Bible studies, of course. We would do whatever people were interested in. If you get a group, I did a class in morality once, how to make a moral decision. That was the first thing I did in prison, actually. That's how I got into prison, actually. And
Well, let's back up. Let's do your vocation story getting in. We know how Tom got in. You brought him in. How did
Right.
you get in?
And I brought Tom in just by the way, not because I know a sucker when I see one, like I said, although, but really because Tom is crazy, all right, in a good way, in a holy way. And Tom bailed at one time out of the financial stratosphere and all the big money guys and everything, and opened a soup kitchen and a house of hospitality and everything with his wife, Rachel.
Mhm.
And so him dealing with street people, crazy people, all that stuff, he likes it. I knew that. And I said, oh, I know where they're keeping the rest of them. So that's why I said, hey, Tom, if I got a deal for you. Oh, and
They're my
by that
people.
point I knew it's a paying gig, by the way. So, and he was retiring.
Beyond I can imagine.
Yeah, like, oh my God,
yeah.
really? I used to say all the time, Holy Mother State has gathered the poor, the lame, the sick, the marginal, the addicted in one convenient place for your ministry convenience, So anyway, so my story. So I'm finishing up my deacon training, and I'm at Ender's Island, which is a lovely island in Long Island Sound off the Connecticut coast near Mystic, as in Mystic Pizza. Some of you may know that reference. And it's a retreat center. Lovely, just surrounded by water, just beautiful. And I'm sitting there, and so we're finishing up the retreat, and there's a lay ministers retreat going on simultaneously on the island, and we see them, we're having lunch with them, we're talking to them and stuff, and the deacon candidates are separate. And then they have told us, well, now for your next 6 weeks, you have to do some kind of other ministry than you're used to doing. You have to stretch yourself a little bit and this kind of stuff. So I can remember I'm sitting on a bench saying, well, what should I do? And the first thing I thought of at this time was, and this was the early 90s, it was like, I was thinking, well, maybe something with AIDS people, people with AIDS. People were really freaked out by that, on so many levels. And because I really, to me, it was like, why are you going to do this? I never understood why you would do this if you didn't want to do this. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
I should go where I'm needed and do things that other people are going to say, oh, really? It's like, that's part of the witness, which is the biggest part of the job. We all should be by virtue of our baptism. But anyways, I thought especially anyone who's ordained. So anyway, so I'm sitting there and I'm thinking AIDS, and it's like, well, they got a handle on that now. It wasn't quite the early thing, people were less freaked out. They understood it more and all that stuff. And people were responding, and especially the Catholic hospitals, of course. That's an untold story of who took the AIDS people in and took care of them. The nuns as the answer to that. But anyway, so I said, I don't know. And I look over and I see this guy sitting on a rock in front of me that I had met at lunch. And his name was George Wesner. And I remember him saying he worked in a prison. And I thought, prison? Never thought of that. Maybe I could do something in prison. So I grabbed George and I say, hey, George, didn't you say you worked at a prison? He says, yeah. He says, I'm the deputy warden, which I had no idea what that meant, but he was the number 2 guy at the joint. That's, you're getting up there. Because to me, it's just this guy I met. And I'm like, oh. And I said, well, I was wondering about this, blah, 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 blah. And I got to do this and that. What do you think? He says, oh, yeah, we'd love to have you. We don't even have a chaplain now. I'll set it up for you. You want to come in and do something? I said, well, like, what should I do? He said, well, you could do a class. You could do. And I said, okay. And I talked to him a little bit about it. We came up with a morality class. So I went in and I did about 8 weeks, scared to death. Not going to lie.
Mhm.
This is in the men's prison that Tom ended up at Gates, JB Gates. And I met the guys. It was wonderful. We had a great time. It was a lot of fun. And I come out, and George, and I saying goodbye to George. I'm saying, yeah, George. I said, yeah, we're done. I said, thank you for doing this. I did my thing for my diaconate. It was very interesting and opened my eyes to a lot of stuff. And, and he says, you want a job? I said, what do you mean? He says, a job here. I said, doing what? He said, being the Catholic chaplain. I said, really? He says, yeah. I said, this a paying job? He's like, oh, yeah, benefits and retirement. I'm like, you're kidding. He's like, no, because to me, this is volunteer stuff. And it's like, no, this is a state job. Now, backstory. I had just closed my third Catholic school. Before that, what I did for a living, if you want to call it that, I taught Catholic high school. And I always tried to teach poor kids in inner city situations. Well, they kept closing. Every 5 or 6 years, I'd go somewhere, 10 years, and boom, they'd close that school. I'd move to another one. They'd close the school. Well, they just, my poor wife, God love her, she wouldn't let me quit. And they had just closed it. And like, I had no idea what I was going to do for money. So when this guy said this was a job, I was like, oh, the baby Jesus is looking out for me, because I needed a job. I was out of work, period.
Yep.
And my wife's a nurse. That's what we were living at that point. Well, I figured this my next move. And so I got a job. And I was there 21 years. And I worked with men at medium security, women at all securities. I worked at the intake place at Corrigan and Rogowski, which are, about 20 minutes away from these two places that are next to each other. And I went up to Brooklyn and worked with sex offenders, which is that whole prison, because, in prison, they kill you if they find out you're a sex offender. I mean, that's,
I know they have them segregated.
They have a whole different institution. So I did some time up there too. And so it was varied, it was interesting, and it was very rewarding. And the interesting thing is, to me, how well prepared I was, because I go back so far that chaplains didn't go to the academy. I never went to the academy. I was trained by the inmates.
So
I figured this out as I went along.
Grandfathered in, as we like to say.
Yeah, right, yeah. And it's a good thing to go to the academy, I think, but by that time, they started talking to Tom. I already had 7, 8 years, whatever. So I knew how things worked. I didn't need to go for that reason. And they kept saying, well, we're going to get to you. And they never did. So I never did the academy. But the thing that was most interesting to me is how God works in this, because I thought this was going to be really different. I taught high school. Well, after about a year, and I realized this is working. I get this. Why do I get this? I thought this was going to be so different. And my approach, my shtick, my song and dance, it worked. And I'm like, I don't get this. Then I figured it out. Once I figured the addiction connection, because you start hearing the stories, and I'm an alcoholic, I'm an addict. It's like, well, is anybody here not? It was very high levels of this stuff. And so I said, well, I got to learn about the addiction and the 12 steps. So I started, a learning journey on that stuff, because that's who I'm dealing with. I should know what's going on here. But anyways, I do know from being a teacher that there is a thing called arrested development.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though I'm looking at 35, 40-year-old adults, they're 15, because that's when they started drinking and doing the drugs, and they have not matured. And so the high school stuff, I know how to do this. I get this. It was a perfect, back to Tom's point about how God leads you, it was a perfect preparation for prison ministry.
Right.
And even just as an example, when we would do mass with the women, one time I got these volunteers in, and they were doing Life Team. You know what Life Team magazine, Life Team program is? Yeah, Drew, in a parish. Well, it's a youth program, and you buy stuff, and you get this training manual stuff. But they do a lot of stuff like when they're singing these contemporary religious songs and stuff, right, at church. They will often act them out with their hands. Like, think of when you see people at a wedding doing the YMCA, the hands go up, YMCA, right? That kind of thing. Like that kind of hand movements to these religious songs, which the teenagers really got into. Well, they did that up at the women's prison. And these women were over the moon doing this stuff. And I said, look at this. They're 14, 15, and some of these women were older than I was. So, I mean, so once the arrested development, you realize that it's like, okay, I know this. And then I put a heavy emphasis on 12 steps and understanding drug and alcohol addiction and various ways of dealing with it and counseling people and stuff, because that was the thing that was going to take them out. You get your confirmation, that's great. You get your GED, that's great. but your addiction is at the gate doing push-ups waiting for you to come out.
Well,
If you don't deal with that,
Mhm.
none of this is going to matter in a day after you're out. So I worked really hard on that. And we also instigated a serious program of training the Catholic chaplains. The chaplain groups used to meet as groups. So the Protestant chaplains met, the Catholics met, whatever. The Muslim chaplains met. And you could do whatever you want with that time. And so we said, well, let's do some training. We got to deal with this. So we brought people in from the addiction services, and they would train us and make sure that all the chaplains knew, because again, if you approach this stuff as a moral problem, you're not getting it. It's not a moral problem. It's a medical problem. It's an addiction, and you got to deal with that. It's a psychological issue. It's all this stuff. So yeah, so that's how I got into it, and I was very surprised, and I was very happy because I'm an adolescent myself.
Let me ask you both a question. When you're in parish ministry, there's no doubt that there are certain parishioners who you're going to see more often than other people because they want to be there with you. They want to approach you. Some people that need to be with you, other people just want to be with you. Was it like that in prison ministry? Did you have guys that you ran into or women that you ran into on a regular basis that maybe became like your assistant in some ways for the prayer services or for the communion services? Did you make relationships? That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, they kind of made sure you put a guard on it to be careful in the whole training about how you have that kind of relationship with an inmate. But yes, being human beings, we do. We had people who you could tell were really trying to work diligently to break the cycle and to get out. But I had chapel workers who I was able to pick that were excellent would just from the conversations and the depth of the conversations, like Dennis said, Arrested Development, but men who would learn. I came to find out that there was a critical age too. I think late 30s, early 40s, you find men who might have been in 2 or 3 times, and they'd come up to you. I remember one guy comes up to me, and they'd been to chapel a couple of times. We hadn't had any deep conversations. We did spend some time, but nothing deep. Finally comes up to me one day, and he really starts to pour his heart out, saying, blah, 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 I want to get out of here. I just looked at him and says, let me guess, you're 42 years old. He says, how do you know? My birthday's in 3 weeks. I said, just observation. It's you come in, life on the installment plan, you do 2-year bid, you do 2 years, and you're out for a couple of years, then you come back. Well, by the time you get to be 39, 40, 41, 42, sleeping on a 3-inch mattress, shiny bologna sandwiches on Wednesday afternoon with a grape-sized apple, you get tired of that. You get tired of the young people that are in prison, the kids who are wild and getting and just upsetting the whole, any quiet that you might find, which is rare. But
they also aged out on the outside. Every time they would go out, they were the older and older. It's like the NFL. Being old, being 40 years old is a career. You're done unless you're Tom Brady.
You're done.
You're just too old to run the streets and keep up with the young crazy guys and all this stuff. And a lot of your friends are dead, and a bunch of them are never getting out of prison. And it's like a normal, relatable example for straight society, non-criminals listening in out there is when you get too old to be going to the nightclub anymore. Just like these 19 and 20-year-old girls are looking at the 33-year-old guy like, oh, grandpa, get away, ooh. And there's always one dope who's 50 years old with a bald head and a ponytail who's still rocking, and he's the joke of the club because he's the one guy who didn't get the memo. Your time in this space is over. And so that would happen with inmates, both inside, like Tom was saying, but also on the outside. When they go back, they weren't going back to anything familiar. And it got harder and harder. And, kind of reality kind of beats it into them that you got to change or you're going to end up dead.
Did you have any days that are memorable to you as being like the worst or the best day? In other words, was it ever bad to the point that you didn't want to go back? I mean, how was it? Or was it great every day? Was it inspiring to you?
No, not every day.
Yeah.
Well, tell me.
Yeah, I had, when I was at the J.B. Gates, they had a residential AA program. A lot could be said for their attempt to get these guys straightened out. And I would go there a couple times a week. And that was just an uplifting experience, because here the guys that were taken were adjudged to be those who were trying to really work their lives and to get back together. And I'd appreciate the stories, the personal stories that would come out of those, the problems that they had. Those are the good days, to be able to look at them and to have some hope, a glimmer of hope that maybe their lives can change. And maybe that I had something to do.
Do you have any understanding whether any of them did? For instance, where I am, I do some work with people who have served their time and are now out under supervised release. It's called the Renew program or reentry, depending on where you're at. And those are the guys who are out and want to stay out and are working hard to stay out, and we help them through that. Did you have an opportunity to see any of your parishioners, I'm going to call them parishioners, on the outside when they got out?
I did not, but I was with a friend of mine who is also retired from DOC, Department of Corrections, who lives down here in Florida. And we went to a restaurant one night here, the Bayside. So I'm with this
you're in Florida.
fella.
Yeah,
he and I
talking about Florida.
Here in Florida, yeah. And we go to the restaurant, and we got our meal, and the waitress brought us that. And then first, she brings everything over the first time, the second time. And then she comes over without bringing anything to check on the meal, and she says to the fellow I'm with, you were at York CI. You were a corrections officer. And he looks at her and says, yes, I was. And she gave him the greatest compliment of how he would, talk to these women, how he treated them with respect, and provided that kind of guidance that you had the chance to do as a CO. But often you never had that conversation. But he was one of the good ones. And that's why when Dennis said, yeah, you hook up with the corrections officers, their lives are a mess. But there were good men in there, too, who were doing the right thing.
Oh, wonderful. There's nothing better than a good CO.
Yep.
I mean, they expect the chaplain to be nice. They expect you to say these things. But boy, when a CO does it, and there were a number of them that did it, it had twice the power of hearing it from a chaplain. You could say the same thing. So there were a number of COs.
And I was actually with Dennis at a restaurant, going into a restaurant, and the lady coming out, she recognized you right away.
Yeah. No, I have it all the time. I remember going to I was preaching at some parish, and I stopped before I got to the church. It was very early in the morning, and McDonald's had just opened in this other town, and I pulled up to the drive-in window and ordered it, and a lady who looked at me when she handed me my thing went, Deacon Dolan! And about 15 people in that McDonald's ran to the window and stuck their head out, hey, Deacon, I'm doing good, and all this stuff, So I guess that was their first job. And it's like, oh, good ladies. Hey, I got to go to church now, but it's nice to see you. I'm praying for you. But no, I've had inmates. I had to change my Facebook stuff because, when I started, inmates wouldn't know a computer if you dropped one on them or how to use it. But as the years went on, obviously, they knew about computers. And I've had multiple inmates contact me through Facebook or whatever, and hey, I'm doing good, and this and that, and or call me on the phone, or they can find you. So I had to change my name on all these things so that if they search for me, it wouldn't come up the same way. I reverse my middle name for my last name and stuff like that. And, I've had a bunch of them, and I've had lunch with a few of them on occasion. So some of them are doing well. Try not to keep it going. It's accidental because it is a defensive ministry, and the person you knew inside who was not, say, using drugs is not the person you're going to meet who's now using drugs on the outside. So you have to be very careful. Like Tom said, it's a defensive ministry. I mean, these are damaged people, and you certainly don't want them coming to your house. And that's happened, by the way, like, oh, who's it? Oh my God, they found me. So, there have been good contacts and things like that, but the professional thing is you try to turn them over. Okay, you get a parish, you get a pastor. Of course, the problem with that is they go to the parish and it's like, oh, after you've done 7, 8, 10 years of work and they're interested, and the pastor says, go away. We don't want your kind here. And so that's always fun too. It's like, yeah, okay, just undo your work, So that happened too. But yeah, no, I had some good, and some people made it.
And I had a case where Rachel and I were actually did Bible study at the women's prison for 5 or 6 years before any of this happened, when I got involved as a chaplain. But we ran into one of the women who we knew from the Bible study who was trying as hard as she can. Her boyfriend was an abuser. And we remember when she was getting ready to go out, this is when we were doing Bible study, and said, just stay away from this guy, stay away from this guy. Well, she gets out and we go back, keep doing our programs for a while. Then we're down in New London one day by the bus station and we're doing shopping and we see her, we run into her. And once an inmate, always a man, and she was waiting to try and get some money to get the bus up to Putnam, Connecticut. And so we gave her some money to get up to the bus. Well, don't you know, like 3-4 months later, we get word that her boyfriend, who was abusive, did in fact kill her. She went back to the relationship. Again, to Dennis's point, it's so difficult to break these habits. You could advise an inmate, don't go back to Bridgeport. Find a new place to go to. Break away
Change your
from
zip code. Move one.
Yeah,
you don't have to go to
can't.
Oklahoma. Just move one. Move. You come home for Sunday dinner, assuming there was a home and a Sunday dinner, which there wasn't.
Yeah.
But
Which is a
here's
big
the thing
assumption.
that people need to understand: there is no one in prison in Europe, and you can look it up. And I'm saying that compared to the number of people we lock up. And that's because, I believe, because they have that nasty health insurance for everybody. Because the majority of people in prison, in my experience, and according to the statistics I've seen, I'm not an expert, but 21 years buys me a decent opinion, I think. Most of the people, what most people think of prison is people who did something wrong. We're going to punish them, and they're going to not do that again. Well, that's true for less than 10%. Yes, I stole money. I was in my right mind. And you know what? Prison works for those people. They don't come back. But if you look at the recidivism rate, the repeat rate, the people who we called frequent flyers, or as Tom would say, doing life on the installment plan. And the worst part of that, of course, is after a while, you were there as long as we were. You'd go into the visiting room where the families would come in to visit the inmates, and you'd find out that this new inmate you're talking to, she knew you from when she was a little kid visiting her mother in the visiting room. This is the biblical thing. The sins of the parents are visited on the children to the 4th generation. Well, there's some truth to that. I don't think God's doing it to you, but, it goes down family systems. But anyways, in Europe, when you're poor and Johnny's got a mental problem, which is what 90% of these people are, 50% of the women in the prison were on high-level psych meds. Now, again, you're in a prison. We got hundreds of people who are employed to tell you when to stand up, when to sit down, when to go to bed, when to eat, 24/7, 365, and we still got to heavily medicate you to make that work. 50% of the population. And they're not giving out those expensive drugs just 'cause. I mean, you got to earn that. I've seen them give someone with a broken leg a Motrin and say, go back to your unit. It wasn't like they're throwing money away on medical. So in Europe, when you have a poor kid, let's say, and he's got a mental problem, he gets treatment. And then he doesn't go to jail. In this country, we don't. Because, the $10,000 would have cost for medication treatment, at 7 years old for Johnny. What happens is, the story I've heard over and over again is that Johnny doesn't fit in. Johnny's acting out. Johnny doesn't know what the problem is. His parents are poor. They don't have the resources, the access, they don't know what's going on or how to deal with it. He's just a bad kid. Then he gets in with other bad kids. Then he falls behind the schoolwork. Then he discovers drugs, which makes him feel better. So now he's self-medicating. Or it might be alcohol, which is also a drug. We forget that. It's also a drug. So he's self-medicating. And then he's addicted. Well, the only way to maintain that is a lifestyle of crime. And that's why he can't get out. He goes in for 2 years, 3 years. He gets out. He comes back because he's still addicted. Now, in Europe, they have very few people. I'm just saying, and you're paying for it. This is the other thing. This is not like, well, I'm not going to pay for it. You can either pay for the medicine or you can pay for this unbelievably expensive prison system. In most places, most states, your prison system is the biggest part of your budget of your state. It's not the judiciary. It's not the state colleges. prison. And you get nothing for that. You're warehousing these people and then turning them back out. It's like locking someone up and saying, listen, I'm going to keep locking you up till your diabetes goes away. Well, you can do it if you want to pay the money to do that, but his diabetes isn't going away. So I believe that if we spent money for people, you could close most of these prisons just go to Europe. Original sin's still in Europe. People are broken. There's mental illness in Europe. They're not locking people up anywhere near the numbers we are.
Mm.
So prison is where all the problems go that we won't deal with. That's what Tom and those are our parishioners. This is all the problems. Any social problem, anything that we're not paying for, too bad for you, lock them up, don't want to know about it. Well, you're paying for it so many ways. And again, with the women, remember this, when you lock mommy up, all those kids go to DCF or youth services or whatever they call it where you live. It costs a lot more to lock a woman up, which you're going to pay because you're going to have to pay for all these kids. And dad, well, what dad? In most cases, like really, So that's my little speech, but that's the system. And that's what Tom and I were dealing with, is all the problems that everybody else wants to ignore and not deal with. So,
well, let me start to, as our hour winds down, let me take it in a slightly different direction. If somebody's listening to this and they're thinking about looking at prison ministry, what are the things that they should consider? How should they discern whether or not they are the right person to enter into prison ministry? What would you tell a person considering?
You have to have a wide heart, I tell you. You have to have a wide berth. This whole idea of judgment or anything, you got to leave it behind. You have to be a people person. You have to know your own charisms, your own gifts, and you have to have a strong desire to want to just share your life with others in ways that can help alleviate suffering, mental, physical, and the emotional suffering that goes along with prison work. I don't know if there's any particular way to prepare other than to do your own inventory and have a listening ear for where the Spirit is guiding you, because probably not going to be the first thing that comes to your mind. You probably have a disposition of wanting to help people and then see where it leads.
Well, I would say also, Tom's absolutely right, but I would say also that, like I said before, you're dealing with a teenage mentality, so you got to be okay with that. And the other thing is, you have to be, as Jesus said, wise as serpents and harmless as doves. So Tom talked about the harmless as doves. I'm going to give you the wise as serpents. You have to understand that a lot of these people see volunteers and chaplains as suckers, and they will try to get you to break the rules. So when they teach you the rules as a volunteer, don't bring this in, don't do this, don't do that, don't do it. Those rules are there for a reason. And when an inmate tells you, well, I'd like you to do this, that is against the rules, you should just remind them of the rules and say, no, you have to be a parent. No. And then the word gets out, just like being a substitute teacher. Okay, this person is not an easy pushover. Or the word gets out that you are, and now you've just really cooked your goose. But you have to be able to have that balance. It's a defensive ministry. Mm-hmm. The other thing I would say is that you are very safe. The inmates appreciate their volunteers. They know you're not their jailer. They know you're there to do something for them. And if an inmate ever touched a volunteer, the other inmates would kill him, or a chaplain.
Well, that brings me to a question. Should one be afraid when they walk into a prison ministry? Is fear a part of the job, or do you control the fear, or do you not have any fear?
I think, you have to, you got to be aware, but it's not fearful. I was never, I was when I first went in, because you see the movies and you wonder what it's going to be. But after a while, you realize, okay, I'm safe here. And like I'm saying, the inmates appreciate you. The inmates will protect you a lot of times. I have a story about that, too, if you wanted to hear it. But it's very common for inmates, because even if an inmate, first of all, there's other ways to volunteers beside the church. One is that, they have art instructors, like maybe you're good at art. You don't have to teach catechism necessarily. You don't have to go in with the chaplains. They have art programs, they have this, they have that. You could do any number of things. You have to ask and see what's available. But the inmates, even if they don't take your program, if someone hurts a volunteer, all the volunteers stop coming. And so I may be in the art class and I really don't care about religion, but I know that you don't touch a volunteer or hurt a volunteer, or my art program's out the window. And one time, just a real quick story, just to illustrate this, I'm getting the mail. The mail was down the main building at Gates. I'm in the chaplain's office and I'm packing up and I'm walking out. And one of the guys comes in and says, "Hey, Deke." I said, "Hey, where are you going?" I said, "Oh, I got to go out and get the mail. You want to walk with me?" He says, "No, I got to talk to you." And he's being real shifty. No, this is a guy I know. And I'm like, what's going on? He says, "I need to talk to you." "Well, when I come back, we'll talk. Let me go get the mail." He says, No, I need to talk to you now. It's important." I said, "You can't wait?" He says, "No." I said, "Okay." So I go back into my office and I'm standing. Now behind me is a window that looks out into the rec yard. And he's looking at me, the window's behind me, and he's looking over my shoulder as he's talking to me. He's not making eye contact. And I said, "What is it?" "Well, and he's hemming and hawing." I'm going, "What's going on?" And he says, "That," and he points behind me. I turn around and the whole yard just erupts into a riot. They were breaking up picnic tables, gangs, beating each other, all stuff. He said, "I didn't want you walking into that." And I said, "Well, I appreciate it." Then he said,
Thank you.
"Hey," he says, "Can I stay here with you?" I said, "Absolutely. We'll stay here and pray for those knuckleheads outside." And he says, "Well, I don't want to get in trouble. I'm not supposed to be here." I said, "You won't get in trouble. I'll make sure you don't get in trouble." So we watched the riot through the window, but that guy, he went out of his way to find me to make sure. So, I mean, again, I wasn't walking out. He didn't see me. I was still out of his sight. He had the initiative. He figured out what was about to happen. He walked up to the chapel, walked in to make sure I was going to be okay. That's my story. So you're really in pretty good shape. You're safer than you are at the mall or at the average American high school.
Yeah,
Because we
really.
took away their
The way
weapons,
things are going, huh?
And there's a CO outside the door wherever you are. And if you're doing your Bible study and someone's acting up, you just look at the CO and go, and that guy's gone. They take him out.
So how has it affected you? After a lifetime, you've both been out of it now for a few years. How has it affected you?
It's one of those things that pop up. Matter of fact, I was talking to my pastor this morning. He goes over to the jail over here on Mondays, another day too. And so he asked, he says, "You have any interest to go back?" And I said, it doesn't make my heart beat faster to go back, but it was a good experience and a positive experience in helping me understand some of the difficulties we face when we have the conversation about prison reform. But yeah, I think I was ready for other things. It does weigh you down. You see, that whole question of, is there really justice? What Dennis was saying, does the crime fit the punishment? We could send, I think what the average cost was, that you could send somebody to jail for what we're doing.
$55,000 the last time I knew what it would cost a year.
That's a big issue. That whether or not the sentencing guidelines, the sentencing laws, the why people are sentenced, who's actually in prison, those are all big issues. And you guys have talked about them today from a first-hand knowledge of those systems. But right now, I'm interested to know the spiritual aspect of it. Did you see God at work in these men and women?
Absolutely. People would tease me at the parish. They'd say, "Oh, how's it going at the prison, Deacon?" And I said, "It's going good." And they saving any souls down there, in a cynical way. And I would say, "Oh yeah, a lot more than in this parish." And that's the truth. There are people that our life has brought to their knees. They are ready to deal with God. Not all of them. And the amount of pain some of these people can take is just beyond my comprehension. It's like, really? You still not? I would have been done a long time ago. But people do change. You do see miracles. Jesus said, "I was in prison and you visited me." And here's my tip. He shows up. You meet Jesus in prison.
I think
That's
we
not
didn't have
poetry.
a name for
You
it.
will, if you go into prison on a regular basis, you will experience Christ. You absolutely will. And it's made my faith much stronger.
We've got the name for it now. We didn't have it before. It was accompaniment. That whole idea of you're with the people trying to bring some comfort and relief. You're listening to them. That's, you can't talk a guy out of being an alcoholic. You just got to be there. You show up. You show what the positive affirmation could do to people. But that's the experience I felt, that there were things that were happening that were beyond me, that were just because I was there, that would not happen.
Oh yeah, and the poor, and it's the poor and the broken too. It's people that are just, they got nothing going, and you just realize how blessed you are with a college education and 3 squares a day and a stable marriage and good parents. You're just like, my God, this is another planet. It really is. And
So we started this podcast with the scripture from St. Matthew of Jesus saying that when you visited the imprisoned, you visited me, and both of you, I think, have now confirmed that that's true. Correct?
absolutely.
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
it. Yeah.
It actually is. I would take that literally now based on my own experience. And before, I assumed it was kind of metaphorical. But there's a lot of powerful spiritual dynamics going on in prison. There really are. And you see them. They're not hidden.
Thank you very much.
And I'll testify that there's more going on there than there were when I was in the boardrooms of the biggest banks in New England, sitting around with the wealthy, the rich.
Or in the average parish where people are going through motions. They think they're superior to these people. And I mean,
Well,
you see these inmates give their last whatever to somebody who just came in who's got nothing. I mean, it's just, oh yeah.
the camel, the eye, the knee, and the camel. Thank you very much. This has been very inspiring and wonderful to listen to.
Well, I hope the person that requested this conversation is uplifted
They're already
by
sorry they
what we
asked.
said.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
But you'd be appreciated if you wanted to get involved in prison ministry. You'd be welcome.
Thank you both very much.
Special thanks to El Jefe Paul Snatchko and our editor, David Dault. The Deacons Pod is powered by the Paulist Fathers. You can find us anywhere you get your podcasts, and of course at our own website, www.deaconspod.com. That's DEACONS with an S, Deacons, plural, pod, all one word.com. And of course, we'd love to hear your comments at our email address, which is deaconspod, again, with an S, deacons, at paulist.org. That's PAULIST.org. Love to hear from you. That's our offering. We thank you for being with us. On behalf of our colleagues at the Missionary Society of St. Paul the Apostle, we wish you a future brighter than any past. Till next time.